All right. Coming down in 3, 2, and 1. The BYU Cougars welcome in the Arizona Wildcats on Saturday afternoon. Big noon kickoff. Joel Klatt, Gus Johnson. We've got it all. We're preview. Try that one more time. 3, 2, and 1. The BYU Cougars welcome in the Arizona Wildcats to the Lavelle Edwards Stadium on Saturday afternoon. We've got big noon kickoff in town. Joel Klatt, Gus Johnson, all the big dogs in town as we talk all things Arizona and BYU with Mike Luke coming up next.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who we like to call everydayers right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel right now is giving you $200 in bonus bets when you place your first $5 bet. Go to FanDuel.com to get started today with that offer. Once again, $200 with just your first $5 bet. Please welcome in now Mike Luke, of course, covering all things Arizona Wildcats down there in Tucson. And Mike, I want to start here. Big game, obviously, Saturday afternoon in Provo at Lavelle Edwards Stadium. Are the Wildcats going to be wowed by the fact that big noon kickoff, Gus Johnson, Joel Klatt, like the big dogs from Fox, is that going to bother them at all that they're coming into town for this game?
I think, Jake, it's a great question. I think there's things that could bother him. I don't know that it's that, though. I mean, it's a pretty experienced group. I mean, you've got a lot of guys that have been in the national forefront. I mean, you got probably the best wide receiver in the country. You got a guy who was a national freshman of the year last year in Noah Fifita. A lot of guys. It's a kind of a veteran-laden team, which I don't know that it's going to be, necessarily intimidated. They went into Utah and they played pretty well. But I wouldn't necessarily worry about that. I would just more worry about just kind of the overall team that BYU has put out on the field so far this year.
Now, I want to talk to you about that Utah win, obviously, because BYU fans, I'm sure, took that in and had quite a good time watching their arch rivals fall to the Arizona Wildcats. I watched that game, and I watched Noah Fifita. It looked like he was at the peak of his powers in this game. And the one thing I have noticed corresponding to the Utah win as compared to the Kansas State and Texas Tech losses is it felt like Arizona had more of a balance offensively in the game against Utah than they did in the other two. Am I right in that assessment?
Yeah, 100%. I think the thing with Arizona football is the first 3 games of the season, you had a guy in Dino Babers, who was the offensive coordinator, who was demoted after 3 games. It was just terrible. Nobody really knew what was going on. Against Utah, it was far from perfect, but Arizona was able to move the ball. You got a sense that if they had to score, they were able to score. And I think you saw that with the plays, obviously over the middle to Kean Burnett for the touchdown to kind of seal the game away. And then, without getting too far off topic, this past week against Texas Tech, they were able to move the ball a ton. They just couldn't get any touchdowns. So the offense, while not great, has been significantly better, I would say, since Matt Adkins took over. But it's still leaving, Jake, a ton of points on the table there. And, that's something you can't do, especially on the road when you're going to play a team like BYU that is, certainly has been the talk of the Big 12 so far.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I think every Cougar fan out there understands that BYU's got a little bit more of an extra microscope on them, obviously. I do think that Cougar fans are wary of Arizona because they do pose a threat. Because when you go up to Utah and win at Rice-Eccles, I think any BYU fan can acknowledge that's a pretty impressive victory for Arizona to have in their back pocket. Give me a sense for how things have gone with this coaching staff. You mentioned Dino Babers got demoted. They promote Matt Adkins. But how has the overall takeover been transitioning from the Jed Fish era into this new era with Arizona?
Well, so far it hasn't been good. There's no other way to put it. Brent Brennan, I think a lot of the questions were, was he prepared to take over a team that's got 3 potential first-round picks that was going to have the microscope on him? And so far, he's looked in a little bit over his head. He had a presser conference earlier where he was asked about what's wrong with the offense, and he said everybody's running in the wrong direction. That's not – you don't want to hear that halfway into the season. You don't want to hear that at all. He's talked about before that, what's the identity of this football team? And he says, honestly, I don't really know. I mean, I guess you give him credit for being honest, But at the same time, it's not necessarily something that's reassuring as a fan to be able to watch and see your coach that basically saying, I don't know what's going on. Players are running in the wrong direction. Defensively, Duane Akina has done a very nice job. The defense has turned out to be, after those first 3 weeks, it's turned out to be pretty good. Against Utah, it was really good. Against Texas Tech, it was really good. And honestly, I think people thought before the season, Jake, that it was going to be the exact opposite, that it was going to be something where the offense was, carrying it and the defense was kind of middle of the pack. And it's quite frankly, it's been the exact opposite. So now I think Arizona fans are like, well, I guess maybe we can win a low scoring game now as opposed to, before the season. But it's been a really, really rough transition. The things that I think you need to do in Arizona, especially in a college town, engage the fan base. He's done none of that. He's basically said that, that's not his job, and which is fine. But at the end of the day, you better win games. Otherwise, you're not going to have much margin for error with the fan base. And so far, it's been a pretty frustrating transition to Brent Brennan.
Now, Brennan, obviously, he has ties to the Dick Tomey era, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. That's how his connection to Arizona was. With regards to how the Arizona fan base is engaging with the Big 12 as a whole, how has that gone? Have they been happy with the transition? Because I know this is one of the fan bases that when all the stuff was going down with the Pac-12 falling apart and everything, the Arizona fan base, from my perspective up here in Utah, was more adamant and overall happy to jump to the Big 12 than many of the other fan bases in the Pac were.
1,000%. Arizona, and I can just speak for myself as well, is ecstatic to be in the Big 12. Big 12 is, you've got fan bases that actually care about athletics. And that is something, in the Pac-12, everybody talks about, how, I miss the Pac-12, this and that. Nobody was saying that at the end because you had so many fan bases that quite frankly just did not care. Like when Arizona, whether that was Stanford, whether it was Cal, whether that was, you go to a game at Washington State, nobody was there for basketball. I mean, you just had a lot of apathetic fan bases that didn't really care. Big 12, every single game, it is a fan base that is ready to rock and roll. And, especially Arizona's basketball school. And there was just, I think when you were going to Haas or where you were going to Maples and there was nobody there, now it's one of those things you're going to be going to, some raucous environments. Heck, even BYU, with the way that they're recruiting now when it comes to basketball. I mean, these are all going to be difficult environments. And I think that that's something that a lot of Arizona fans were excited about. And so far, so good. It's been a fun journey. Big fan of Kansas State and Texas Tech fans, Utah fans, not so much. But, so far it's been pretty good, though, Jake.
Now, you talk about like Cal. I was floored that they got that many fans to show up for College Game Day this past week. I was like, where did they all come from? Because I'm with you. Having watched a bunch of Pac-12 games, I'm like, Cal doesn't even fill that many people in their stadium when they play football. So I was just, so I get what you're saying. Here's my other question with regards to Arizona. You mentioned that the fact that they're a basketball school. Lute Olson set that up decades ago with what he did down there in Tucson. Is there any hope at any point of Arizona football, I guess, getting on the same level potentially as Arizona basketball, or is it always going to be one-sided in that affair?
I would love to sit here and tell you that we're going to have some Lavelle Edwards type success in the year 2024. I don't see that happening. Listen, Arizona basketball, whether it's a top 10, top 12 entity, it's something that rings nationally now. And, you just look at it, you recruit at a very high level. You expect top 10 finishes around here. With Arizona football, you don't. I mean, when Arizona's had a good season in football, you generally have taken a step back. And I think this year is certainly looking like that could potentially be the situation. Plus, there just isn't you don't have necessarily great basketball prospects here in Tucson, but you can recruit nationally. Arizona football is never, in my opinion, going to have the cachet to really be able to recruit nationally. So much of what you have to do is under the radar stuff. You have to be able to, and that's one thing Jed Fish was very good at. He said, I'm not going to be able to get 5-star kids out of SEC country. So we're going to load up on Polynesian kids. We're going to load up on big guys. And guess what? If they don't work, that's fine. But if we're going to miss big. There's a specific template that you have to be able, I think, to follow to win at Arizona. And it gives your margin for error next to nothing, because if you don't hit on a lot of these kids that are kind of under the radar, then probably not going to be super successful.
All right, I want to dig more into those specific players coming up next. I got some questions obviously about Noah Fifita, Tatero, and McMillan, the guys that you're expecting to talk about. Let's just put it that way, Mike, and we'll get to that momentarily right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. Now, Gametime is here for you guys, no matter what you're into when it comes to your sporting events, your music, your concerts, your theaters events, whatever you like to go out to. Check out our friends over at Gametime. They've got incredible features inside the app. The best part is they got an incredible feature called the all-in pricing feature. You toggle it in the app. You can find out exactly what you're paying right up front with fees included. All of us have been on a website before to buy tickets, have been absolutely frustrated when you get to the checkout screen and see it feels like an avalanche of fees tacked on to the ticket price. You toggle that in the app feature with Gametime. You know exactly what you're paying right up front. More importantly, they have the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and even job loss protection. It's all built in with our friends at Gametime. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets today and do it with our friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app today, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Some terms apply, but again, create that account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your purchase. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for being with us here. Continuing on now with Mike Luke from down there in Tucson. And Mike, you work for Phoenix Sports, if I'm not mistaken. It's kind of your main thing. Mm-hmm. And I know you've done a really good job. I actually was checking out one of your shows last week in the lead up to your game against Texas Tech, because I like to kind of catch up with how everybody's going in the Big 12. Going into that game against Texas Tech, coming off of that Utah win, it felt like Arizona was riding pretty high because Noah Fifita, there's no secret that he was a guy that wanted to go to Utah, if you believe the reports, when he was coming out of high school, and he went up and beat the team that he planned on playing for his entire life.
Right.
But then they laid an egg a little bit against Texas Tech. So give me a sense of where Fifita is at right now as a quarterback. Is he as legit as I believe he can and will be at some point?
You know, I'm all in on Noah still. I believe that so much of this is the coaching staff kind of being in over its head, especially on the offensive side. You look at, now listen, he is missing people. I get that. But when you've got the coach coming out and saying people are running the wrong way, I don't really know what to say. There's been some odd things too, like Kean Burnett, for example. And, I guess it depends on what you think about PFF or whatnot, but he's rated as the top tight end in the West right now when he plays. But you're playing a guy in Sam Olsen from San Jose State that's just quite frankly not that good. He was getting 20 more snaps than him. You're moving the offensive line over for no reason. Against Utah, the offensive line played really well. You started putting other guys in like Ryan Stewart that I don't know exactly what's going on there. And you're not really playing to Noah's strengths. Noah's a very cerebral quarterback. Noah's a guy that can get the ball out early. He's a guy that generally makes reads, and he's just missing stuff. I mean, it doesn't even look like the same quarterback to a certain degree to what we've watched. And I think that's what's frustrating, because we've all seen Noah play. We know what he can do. And what we've seen so far this year has not been good. Now, against Texas Tech, I think the first thing that you could say is they moved the ball a ton. They outgained Tech by a lot. The problem is, and know this better than anybody, if you stall out inside the 20 and you settle for field goals, you're going to lose that game against a good team. Now, maybe against a crummy team, you won't stall, or you can get away with that. But against a Tech, against a BYU, you can't get away with getting to the 13-yard line and saying, all right, well, we got to settle for the 30-yard field goal now. That just can't be the case. And so far, that has been the case. And I think that's what's very frustrating for so many U of A fans at this point, Jake.
All right, I'm going to go with a little bit of a deep cut for you here. Quali Conley is leading rusher for Arizona. I actually covered Quali and actually talked to him when he was a freshman all the way back when it was originally, now it was Dixie State, now Utah Tech University.
Right.
He was a freshman there. I remember talking to him. It's absolutely been incredible to watch his career develop, because as you probably, as your listeners know, and some of my BYU fans may know, he went from Utah Tech to San Jose State, played for Brent Brennan, was a very good player out there, and then made the transition with Brent to Arizona. It's been incredible to watch him leap from level to level, FCS to G5, now to Power 4. What's made him so effective at this level?
Oh man, Jake, he's a treasure. He's just a treasure of a football player. Just to watch how he's gone, it looked like he was probably going to be the backup this year to Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. He ran into obviously eligibility issues, but this kid's good. I mean, there's no way around it. This is a kid that's going to be a 1,300 yard rusher. I mean, I don't know if he'll play in the NFL, but I also don't know that he won't play in the NFL. He's a very good pass. He's a very good pass catcher. He sets up his tackle. He sets up his angles very well in the running game. There are some guys that you see that like, when they play with, when they're running, you're like, all right, well, you're just physically gifted, but you don't really know how to play it. This dude's a running back. This guy was meant to play running back. And I have no issues at all. The passing game has been hit or miss, but I've got no issues at all with the U of A running game this year. As a matter of fact, I think they should probably go to it more between him and Kedrick Reesano. This has been a very nice little tandem, but Quali Conley is just a treasure of a football player. I wish you had a roster loaded with Quali Conleys because he goes about it the right way. He's a professional and he's ready when called. And, so far he's played well against almost every school that he's gone against.
That's a really cool story because, like I said, I remember talking to him when, and it's cool to see where he's at today. And I'm with you. I don't know what his future holds, but that kid, an incredible story nonetheless. All right, big name obviously at the wide receiver position. Tateroa McMillan seems to be the focal point. You mentioned Kean Burnett as well, who's had a really, really good season to this point. But what is it about McMillan? I remember I watched that New Mexico game when he was averaging 30-plus yards per reception and just dominant. What makes him so good?
And this is with all due respect to Luther Burden, this is the best wide receiver in the country. He just is. He is, even on a game where he doesn't even necessarily stand out like he did against Tech, he still has 8 for 160. He's massive. He's every bit of 6'6". He's got great ball skills. His acceleration is better. I think at the combine, people are going to be surprised because I think he's probably going to run something in the high 4.4s when he measures in at 6'5", 215 pounds. He's just an easy guy to see as an NFL #1 wide receiver. At what level is he going to be? Is he going to be that elite level? I don't know, but he certainly could be. But his ball skills are second to none. They're super elite. I hate putting this comparison out there, but when you kind of look at just how he plays, and again, I'm not saying he's going to be this. He's got a little Larry Fitzgerald in him, just kind of how he can high point the ball. He's a mismatch. And if he's in one-on-one coverage, he's going to win that every single time. There's not a DB in the country that is just big enough to be able to hang with him. The issues that he's had a couple odd issues though this year. There's been plays where he could have gone up and got the ball and he's trying to make the spectacular one-handed catch. He's done that probably 6 or 7 times this year. And it's not something we've seen before. He can make those catches, but it's almost like he's trying to do it to try to get the highlight reel or whatever the case may be. Doesn't need to do that. Obviously he had the fumble against Texas Tech to close out the game when, it looked like Arizona was going to drive. But as a football player, he's the best wide receiver to ever come through here. In my opinion, he's easily the best wide receiver in the country. Guys like him don't come here. They just don't. Guys like that end up at Georgia. They end up at Alabama. And this is obviously his last year here, but he's a special football player. There's really no other way to put it.
Flipping over to the defense for a minute, Takario Davis, you talk about size in terms of a positional size. Takario Davis, if I'm mistaken, he's all a 6'4". Is that right? At quarterback, and he shows all the skills to be what I believe is a first-round draft pick. How much of a problem is he going to be for BYU's wide receivers on Saturday?
Takario's an interesting player because you're right. He's probably going to be a first-round pick. I think he's going to test very well. The problem is he cannot catch the ball. He has the worst hands of any player I've ever seen, honestly. People around here joke. I think it was last year he had like 18 pass deflections and 1 interception, and these are pass deflections too, where he's getting both hands on the ball. And you see it this year as well. He had a game where he had 5 pass deflections and 3 of them should have been picks. He can't catch the ball, but his job also is to not necessarily catch the ball, to be able to prevent completions. And he does a very good job at that. He is very instinctive for being a big dude. He's pretty good in and out of his cuts. He's physical. He likes football. He continues to get better on a game-by-game basis. Arizona's got a couple guys like that across the roster, but he would start anywhere in the country. He's that type of a football player. He'd start anywhere.
Now, you talked about it earlier that under Jedd Fisch, he really needed to bring in Polynesian players. Jacob Manu, leading tackler for this team, Santa Ana, California, Polynesian kid. It kind of screams, I think, exactly what you were talking about. They wanted to lean into what their identity was, and he very much fits the bill here. How much better can this kid get? Because I think he's an elite player already.
No, Manu's great. I mean, all the kids they got from Servite, I mean, it was an amazing class because you got Jacob Manu, you got Kian Burnett, you got Noah Fifita, and you got Teteroa McMillan, all from the same class at Servite. And the one that they didn't offer, Mason Graham, turned out pretty good at Michigan. So, that's to put it mildly. But Jacob Manu is just the epitome of a guy who's probably about 5'8", 205, 210, but he sees the game well ahead. The big thing for him last year was that he was able to start making tackles behind the line of scrimmage. He struggled to start out this year. They got the defensive line issues figured out because, again, he's not a LeVar Arrington type where you can just turn him loose. He's got to have guys that can keep him off or keep linemen off of him. But when he's allowed to do that, he's a wrecking ball. I mean, he's another one. He's a special football player.
Now, last thing for me on the defense is there's 11 sacks spread across this roster for Arizona, but who's the leading, I guess, pass rusher for this team? Because like I said, it's very balanced in terms of the overall.
Probably Trey Smith, the kid that got from San Jose State. He's generally around the football. I don't know that he's going to play in the NFL, but it's also kind of the Quali Conley situation. I don't know that he won't play in the NFL. I could see, I bet at the end of the year, he'll have 6.5, 7 sacks. There's nobody that is necessarily super dynamic where, you're just like, all right, well, they're going to end up with 10, 12 sacks this year. But it's kind of a committee approach. They've inserted a few new interior linemen led by Isaiah Johnson, who's made a huge impact. The D-line overall has been very solid. And I think going into the year, that was a question, is how good was the D-line going to be? But the last 2 games, the D-line has been spectacular.
Give me a sense, because I'm trying to remember who it was. I do my radio show up here in Salt Lake City. Obviously, during the Pac-12 era, we had guys on from Arizona all the time. And I don't remember who it was down there that came on one time and told us, Jake, you didn't tell me this. He told DJ and PK, the show that I produced. He said, guys, Arizona doesn't have defensive linemen that weigh more than 250 pounds. And all of us kind of like mouse were gave like, can that be true? And the next game we saw it. They just didn't have the size. Have they built up that defensive line to the level that it can compete and hold its own against Big 12 competition? That
is one thing that Jedd Fisch did a really good job of, is you got guys that are bigger. And yes, I would say they are. When you look at the ends, I mean, you're looking at a guy in Trey Smith that's 6'6", 255. When you're looking the interior, you've got a Stanley Ataufo, a USC transfer, about 6'6", 295. Isaiah Johnson, 6'1", 320. And then on the edge, you've got a Tai Uiagalelei, who's about 275 pounds. I mean, it's not a massively imposing line, but it's definitely good enough. And the problem, though, is like, during the Rich Rod era, and that might be what you're referring to, is that you had guys that look like me. You literally, or I kid you not, I mean, you were, for a whole season, you were throwing out a 235-pound nose tackle in Parker Zellers. So it was a joke. It was comical. It's not nearly like that anymore, and they've been able to hold up pretty well. So,
last thing for me, real quick, Duane Akina, he's been around the game forever. You talked about him earlier, how he's made this defensive force. What's been the key to it? What has he done to transform it?
Duane Akina is just he's a football savant. You're probably looking at the most accredited defensive backs coach in college football history. He's coached 5 Thorpe Award winners. He's coached 14 first-round picks, and it goes from Texas to Arizona to Stanford. I mean, he's that dude. Hadn't really been a defensive coordinator in over 20 years. Came here to Arizona. Jedd Fisch in year 2, the defense was atrocious. He brought him in kind of as an advisor. Overnight, things changed. And when Brent Brennan took over, he said he wanted Duane Akina to be his guy. And Duane Akina has done a spectacular job. He's 66, but he's going on 36. He is incredibly he's motivated. He's good. He's the goods. And he's one of the guys that I hope that he's the defensive coordinator as long as he wants to be here, because the players respond to him. Coaches respond to him. He's just another one. He's just kind of a gem of a coach.
All right. We will wrap up this edition of Locked On Cougars. Coming up next, we'll talk a little bit about what to expect from the game on Saturday. We'll get to that momentarily right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel's here for you guys, no matter what you're into when it comes to your sports betting needs. If you want to get out there, maybe put some Skittles, as it were, on this BYU Arizona game, you can do that. NFL, NBA upcoming, NHL. Those of you who are Utah Hockey Club fans, we just saw the start of the season in that regard. But you can start the season with a big return with our friends at FanDuel. They are America's number one sports book. And right now, when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, you live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And you'll get started today with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Once again, $200 bonus bets guaranteed with your first $5 bet. It's all courtesy of your friends at FanDuel. You can get started today at FanDuel.com. Once again, that's FanDuel.com, and FanDuel is, once again, America's number one sports book. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. All right, final stanza of today's show with Mike Luke. And Mike, big noon kickoff coming to town. BYU has not had the traveling road show circus come to Provo in 15 years. It was 2009 the last time BYU had a college game day, ESPN's college game day in town. And Cougar fans can recite for you the history of BYU when college game day shows up. They usually lose. Yeah. So, how does Arizona respond when it comes to these bigger environments and having a big name production as part of the game?
Arizona football is kind of the epitome of they're going to surprise you when you least expect it, and they're going to disappoint you when you most expect it. That's going to be I look for them to actually play well. I generally coming off a loss, they play pretty well. I look for that to be the case. I don't necessarily think they're going to be intimidated. A lot of these guys, like I said, grew up admiring BYU. Grew up admiring just the state of Utah. There's a heavy LDS, heavy, Polynesian influence on this team. I think they're going to be ready. And it's a very talented team. That's the reason that I think people are so frustrated is that you've got three guys that are probably going to be first round picks on this roster, which never happens here. And you've got a team with a ton of experience. And so I look for them actually to play pretty well.
Give me a sense from the Arizona perspective. What's the most concerning thing about facing a nationally ranked BYU team on their home turf?
Basically the fact that BYU is solid across the board. They're not going to, and Arizona's not doing a great job of playing teams that don't beat themselves. And I think the thing with BYU that always kind of, when we were doing the preseason media polls is, and everybody was picking BYU like dead last or whatever, BYU's been just such a solid program that it's hard for me to imagine having two straight just awful seasons. It just doesn't ever seem to be like that's the type of situation. But that to me is the big thing. And when it comes to Arizona, they're going to have to score points. If they don't score points, then they don't deserve to win. I mean, you got a lot of different guys. The big problem, though, for Arizona is you got to find somebody else besides Tetaroa McMillan. If you find somebody else besides him, like a Kean Burnett, I think they got a really good chance. But again, watching BYU from afar, it's been a pretty impressive show. And I think right now you got to be looking at Kalani Sitake as being the easy shoe-in for Big 12 Coach of the Year to this point, and probably a guy that's going to get some national love.
We'll see what happens. Looking forward to this because the biggest thing is I think Cougar fans, there's like this element to this, and I'll get your thought on this. BYU's 5-0, and I still think there's a contingent of BYU fans. I'm not saying it's a complete majority, but it might be close to a majority. We're still like, all right, when's the other shoe going to drop?
Yeah.
And I think that's just a holdover from last season when BYU lost 5 straight at the end of the year and went 5-7. But what do you expect out of this game? Give me a sense of what your keys to an Arizona win would be and what you expect to come out of this.
Arizona's going to have to score touchdowns. I mean, I know I keep going back to that. They got to score touchdowns. If you don't score touchdowns against a team like BYU, you're not going to win the game. Again, against Texas Tech, it was kind of good and bad because the offense moved the ball all up and down the field, but you can't have just brain dead decisions. Noah Fifita can't do that. And that is and that's kind of, was the situation against Texas Tech. But I honestly look for Arizona. This would be the most epitome Arizona to lose or win this game and then go back and lay an egg on homecoming the following week. I mean, that's that kind of seems to be the tradition. That kind of seems to be how it rolls.
Well, if that happened, you'd be 2-0 in the state of Utah in the season. So
right.
Maybe they should just relocate to Utah for the rest of the year.
I was just going to say Ogden, Utah, here we come. And if we got anybody else from Utah Tech or whatever was Dixie State, bring them this way here, Jake.
Well, yeah, you check out Southern Utah and Cedar City on your way up. Hey, you got all that covered.
We'll be good to go.
Just to give Cougar fans a sense, you mentioned the fact that Texas Tech outgunned Arizona outgunned Texas Tech in yardage. It was 421 yards to about 3 and change for Texas Tech. And I remember watching that game, and it was a lot of between the 20s. Arizona would motor up and down the field, but yet they got into the scoring zone, as they call it, a red zone, and just had struggles getting into the end zone. Have they been talking about focusing on that in practice? What have they been doing to rectify that?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so. I mean, practice is closed and stuff, but I would certainly hope so, because they also do these weird things where they have these slow developing 3rd and 1s where they have these delayed handoffs that don't fool anybody. I think you got to stop out thinking yourself. I think, listen, I mean, another guy we haven't really talked about, Jonas Savanea, is on a lot of first round boards. When you got somebody in there on the interior, just get behind him and go. That's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for in this game. Just, don't outthink yourself, because again, Arizona's also not good enough to outthink themselves. So those are kind of my keys to the game when it comes to that.
Well, it should be a fun one. We'll make a Gusgasm or two, hopefully, and obviously we'll have big noon kickoff on site. But Mike, thanks for carving out some time to preview the game with me, and I look forward to seeing what all plays out on Saturday afternoon. All right.
Always a pleasure, Jake. Appreciate you having me on, buddy.
All right, there you go. That's Mike Luke. A big thank you to him for taking the time to join us here on Locked On Cougars. A big thank you to all of you for tuning in, as always, making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars. Thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us here on the podcast as well. Until tomorrow, this has been the Locked On Cougars podcast.